safe enough requires more than just being safer than a human driver. Truth or myth? This one's true, but the reasons why it's true are a lot more complicated than simply people want it to be safer. To understand this, first, let's talk about what do people actually mean by safe for an autonomous vehicle? Well, you could say human drivers are bad, so computers will be safe, but that's not necessarily true. That's just an intuitive argument that comes from people, I guess, who've never seen a computer failure. I'm not sure who those folks are because computers fail all the time, but intuitively, humans are bad, so computers will be safe is an argument you hear. Some companies say safety is our #1 priority, but that's really just a slogan. Some folks say safe driving behavior and good roadmanship is enough to make you safe. Well, that's part of the story. But they also say that you tested and simulated for millions of miles, and that proves safe driving behavior and roadmanship. Well, millions of miles of testing is good, but it's not near enough. They may say, well, the risk is managed by insurance. We have an insurance policy, so we must be safe, or the insurance company would not have given us a policy. Well, that's only partly true. There's a lot more to safety than just that. They'll say, we conform to safety standards. Conforming to safety standards is a great thing, but how you conform and whether you're using the right safety standards also enters into it. They'll say that they have a safety case, an argument that shows that they're safe, supported by evidence. That's really great to hear, but you need to do other things as well. And they'll say we have positive risk balance. We're a better driver than a human. While you may hear all of the above things, safety in most discussions usually boils down to the intuitive notion that, well, we're safer than a human, so that must mean we're safe enough. Let's take a look at that argument about we're safer than human drivers, so that's good enough, because it turns out in reality, you probably need more than that. Positive risk balance is a name given to the concept of safer than a human driver. The idea is that your risk is lower than that posed by a human driver, so that's a justification to be out on public roads. Sounds good. I mean, we're better than a human. What do you want from us? Well, it turns out that nailing down what that even means is difficult, and as we'll see in later slides, there's actually more to it than that. If you want to say we're safer than human, you have to say which human? Do you want to be safer than the 28% who are alcohol impaired, driving under the influence, causing fatalities? That means if you look at all the crashes involving human drivers as a baseline, more than a quarter of them involve alcohol use. Do you want to include those in your baseline? How about the speed-related, the distracted, the drowsy? So do you want to be better than an average human with all these bad behaviors that you said you wouldn't have? Or do you want to be better than a human driver who's not indulging in these behaviors? Also, what age? People say old drivers are bad. The data doesn't show that. In fact, a 60-year-old driver is 3.5 times better than a 16-year-old. So do you want to be better than a 16-year-old? Better than an average that includes some 16-year-olds? Or better than a mature 60-year-old driver who has excellent judgment? Where and who also matters. There's 3.4 times the fatality per vehicle mile based on which state you're in. Some states are pretty safe, some are pretty scary. Are you going to match your driving safety with the state you're in? If you're operating in a safe state and use the national average, that's basically giving you an unfair advantage and makes you potentially more dangerous than all the vehicles around you because you're driving national average in a state that happens to be quite safe. There's also victim demographics. If you have more pedestrian fatalities than other drivers, you could have a net safer outcome and still have a problem. Also, which vehicle? New vehicles have active safety, but the average car age in the US is now 12 years old and does not have all the fancy active safety features. If you have a robotaxi equipped with amazing active safety features, it's not fair to compare it against a 20-year-old economy car. You should be comparing it against new cars with comparable active safety features that do not have automation enabled. There are other safety considerations. You have to consider whether you're having risk transfer onto vulnerable populations. What if the total number of fatalities goes down, but the number of vulnerable road users, pedestrians and so on, doubles? You could have fewer total fatalities and yet increase the risk to vulnerable populations. While you can say that's safer than a human driver on average, that's probably going to be an issue because there are particular segments of the population there that are bearing the brunt of increased harm. You could say, well, you should also avoid negligent driving behavior. If you're intentionally breaking traffic rules and that leads to crashes, then that's not going to be okay, even if your net safety is better. You want to look at fine-grained regulatory control of risks. Recalls are not about average safety typically. They're about specific bad behavior. So if you have a problem, for instance, that you're running into emergency vehicles at crash scenes because the flashing lights confuse your automation system, you may have, in fact, a better net safety record, but you keep hitting emergency response vehicles and injuring emergency responders. That's not going to be okay. That's not going to be acceptable safety, regardless of the average safety of your system. There are also ethical and equity concerns. What if some demographics are at increased risk? What if some folks, based on skin color or clothing type or where they live or mobility aids, who knows what if they're at dramatically increased risk because your automation is poor at dealing with them? That's also going to be a problem, even if your net safety is improved compared to average human drivers. Eventually, there'll also be crash-by-crash comparisons. Regardless of net safety, regardless of having addressed all the other issues, there will be instances in which it's asked if a human driver would have made that same mistake. And if the human driver would not have made the mistake, that's going to look bad for the technology, regardless of net safety and better than human driver on average. So it may be relevant sometimes to ask, is it better than a human driver on a crash-by-crash basis? Overall, you're going to need more than improved statistical average safety for people to believe that your robotaxi or other autonomous vehicle is actually safe enough to be deployed on public roads.